Welcome back to the Planivaudio Travel Podcast, brought to you by Planiversity.com. I'm Eric Allen, founder of Planiversity.com, and here today to talk to you about travel high season. Now, travel high season, what is that? It's, it could mean a lot of things, but here's what I want you to think. So think of, just like we discussed in the past, think of normal travel as like an EKG or heart rate monitor, right? You got this long line, it's just constantly flowing like this. And then at certain points throughout the year, like Christmas, it jumps. And there's a lot of travel right there. You know, Thanksgiving, it jumps. Memorial Day weekend, it jumps. 4th of July weekend, it jumps. And then you have the months of July and August where that jump is expanded out like this. It's not just a thin little point now. We have 2 months of solid high density traffic, travel stress, raised costs, raised stress, raised, wait times. And that's exactly what the travel high season means for most people, right? It's not just one thing. It brings about a lot of things. It brings those higher stress levels. It brings those higher costs and everything ranging from the price of a gallon of gas to hotel rates to plane tickets. Okay. It also brings longer wait times. So if you plan on flying somewhere, you can expect during these travel months for there to be longer security lines, longer check-in lines, etc., which means you have to do more vigilant planning on the front end to make sure that you're not significantly impacted. Okay. And when I say significantly, I don't want to emphasize that as in like, you better show up 4 hours early. Otherwise, you're going to be terribly, lost in the process, or you're going to miss your flight, something like that. It's not that, but a little extra planning and a little preparation in advance will definitely save you a lot of stress. So I'm going to kick this off by talking about my own recent personal travel experience during the high travel season, which we're not out of it yet. So this would be just 1 month of it. Hope you got a cup of coffee. I definitely do. And it is piping hot. Wow. Okay. So we're going to talk about my recent trip to Europe in July. Okay, one of the things that I definitely experienced was the Munich Airport, the high concentration of travelers there. Travelers from all over the world. I mean, we're talking from North America, from Europe, from the Middle East, from Africa, from Asia. I'd never seen the Munich airport that busy. Now, for those of you who have been through Munich, it can be a busier airport. It's not a small airport by any means, but it's also not the size of an airport like Frankfurt is. Frankfurt's one of the largest airports in Europe, whereas Munich is a little bit more modest. It's 25 kilometers north of the city itself, so it's has a little bit of distance there, and you would never expect it to be as busy as it was. So I've been through there many, many times, and I usually can flow through the process of check-in and security lines and everything. And, I would say under 30 minutes, and that includes the customs and immigration. So this time traveling there, I'd never seen it so busy. I'd never seen it so packed there. Security lines were over an hour long. The rental car check-in was so full that my vehicle didn't even get checked in until after 2 days later. So I turned it in at about 8:30 in the morning on the 24th, and on the invoice, it doesn't get turned in until 11:30 on the 26th. So that means this guy right here gets billed for an additional 2 days, even though I'm not at fault. So obviously that's not my fault, and that's something that the rental car company takes care of. But you have to be extra vigilant during those times to make sure that you're not falling through the cracks on these types of things. Okay. So it wasn't just the airport where I noticed the problems. It was also the plane tickets. I'm paying over twice what I normally pay for a round trip plane ticket to go there. It's the rental car rates, those also peaked. It's the cost of a gallon of gas that also peaks. A lot of these things tend to peak during the high travel season because of the supply and demand, right? So anytime there's a greater demand is a time where people have the opportunity, or companies have the opportunity to get away with raising those rates because, well, quite frankly, people will pay it, right? So the travel high season, it's Typically, we know it as the months of July and August, but that doesn't mean that it can't stretch into portions of June. It doesn't mean it can't stretch into portions of September. In fact, it absolutely can, depending on where you're coming from, because in some places the school year ends in May, and maybe people already want to get a jump on travel in June, or maybe some people don't have to be back to school or work until portions of September, and they just kind of prefer the later summer trips, and maybe there's just those people that try to avoid that high density window, and they'll actually aim for the June timeframe or the May timeframe or the early September timeframe in order to avoid the chaos, the crowds, the long wait times, and the prices. Save a little bit more money, stay closer to the budget. So there's no set rule, but I would always consider the high travel season to be the months of July and August. Okay, so higher stress, longer wait times, higher costs, those are all factors in here. And we're going to kick this off by talking about the best times to book when we're talking about travel high season. Okay, so the travel high season, when plane tickets are being released, when prices are being released, there's not really one set time. All right, so if I wanted to travel to Brazil this time next year, I could absolutely book my plane ticket right now. There's that window that extends, but usually prices you'll find to be in the most favorable range, somewhere between the 3 to 6 month out window. Okay, this is what most travel analysts are saying, is that if you wait until that 3 to 6 months out, you're going to be better off price wise. Obviously, if you're within 3 months of your travel date, things are going to be a bit more expensive, and obviously the most obvious statement, the closer you get to that travel date, the more expensive the ticket's going to become, until you probably just get to a point where it's last minute, there's a seat available, and they'll let it go at a bargain rate. But that doesn't always happen. I certainly wouldn't count on that happening. So what you can expect is, if I'm traveling, the middle of July, we'll just say July 15th, I absolutely want to be booking a ticket somewhere around April. Now, everybody doesn't have that opportunity. A lot of people might not have their travel dates at work settled until a certain time. Sometimes students, they make it through the school year and come to find out they got to take summer school just to continue on to the next school year. So there's a lot of factors, a lot of variables that play into our daily lives that impact those things, which unfortunately end up impacting our ability to plan in advance. And that's a sad thing, but it's also a reality of ours. So in an ideal world, we would all know that we want to go somewhere and book something 6 months out, so we get the most ideal price on a plane ticket, on a rental on the lake, on a car rental. There's all sorts of things you can do to try and lock in those prices early. But most people don't have that opportunity. Okay, most people don't end up hitting that window, and they end up buying or purchasing their plane tickets, their train tickets, their rentals, everything within that 3 month window. And that's when they're going to experience the higher rates. So let's go ahead and just so we can kind of keep tally on this stuff, we're going to go ahead and switch over to the whiteboard right here. So here we go. We have the travel high season. There again, higher stress, longer wait times, more time required for almost everything. These are common factors, right? So now let's talk about the other points, first of all being the best times to book. All right. So the best time to book in most cases, again, it's going to be that 3 to 6 months out window. All right. Again, this is not anything set in stone. I don't want people to think that, hey, if I just aim for that 4 month out, that 5 months out, I'm going to get the best rate, because you can't stick to that. Everything is situational dependent, right? So we've seen that certain resorts, maybe like a Disney resort, something like that, people are actually booking those a year out. Some places are so in demand that they'll book a year or two in advance. That's just the reality, and that's because they have a limited supply of rooms or accommodations. But that really has nothing to do with the individual. So obviously, don't take my advice on a 3 to 6 month out if what you're looking for is to book a resort that is always filling up a year in advance. Obviously, you got to do your homework. You got to look into those things, and if that's what ends up happening is that they book a year in advance, you have to adjust cost for that. Okay. But we're just talking about if you want to go on your typical trip, you're going overseas, you're going cross country, it doesn't really matter. You plan on flying from New York, Chicago, or wherever down to Florida, you have to expect that travel high season is going to everything's going to peak, and you need to find that best time. So again, the best time to book is going to be that 3 to 6 month out window. I have seen some analysts say somewhere around 75 days out is the best time frame. But when we're talking about high season, the market changes constantly. The market's always up, it's down, and that affects a lot of times the prices on goods and commodities, services, etc. And that's no different in the flight industry. So airliners, they'll do the same thing. They'll base their ticket prices on demand, on the market. And even in a year like this, in 2022, when we see inflation taking root, that's something that's just not really changing things. I mean, things have not been any less expensive this year just because inflation is impacting us, right? So people still have to deal with the inflation, and they still have to deal with those high prices. So again, 3 to 6 months is going to be your best option. When to arrive at the airport, that's the next thing we're going to talk about. So let me just go ahead and throw this up on my whiteboard. When to arrive. That's going to be a big one, right? So travel high season, again, we're talking about long lines. I'd never seen, the Munich Airport have a security line that was greater than an hour in length, but it definitely happened, right? So one of the things that I need to do, or that we all need to do, is plan in advance. So if you're going to be showing up to the airport for an international flight, most times what they'll say is, for international flights, show up 3 hours early. For domestic flights, show up 2 hours early. In the travel high season, I wouldn't count on those numbers. And let's just be honest, the closer you are to your window, the more stressed you're going to be. So my suggestion for everyone is, if you're traveling during these months, just arrive early. If you're supposed to arrive 3 hours early for an international flight, just go 4 hours early. It's so much less stressful to sit there in the terminal, read a book, enjoy a cup of coffee, get something to eat, use the bathroom, find a seat and just take it easy and wait on your flight. It's so much less stressful to do those things than it is to be standing in the security line wondering if you're going to make it in time, to be asking the people ahead of you if you can cut them or if you can jump ahead of them in line so that you can make your flight, the check-in times. You don't have to run from one end of the airport down to the other. You don't have to stress about trying to navigate the airport that you're not familiar with. All these things that we're literally setting ourselves up for failure if we don't just arrive a little bit early. I might even show up, depending on the location or the destination, I might show up, a little bit early. So we're talking, travel high season would be July and August. Now you have 4th of July weekend in there in the United States. Travel is going to be out of control. Airports are going to be full. The roadways are going to be full. Everything's just going to be full with travelers. So if I'm even doing a domestic flight, I might show up 3 to 4 hours early for that. Now, please don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to tell everyone show up 6 hours early, but what I would say is give yourself a solid buffer. Don't show up only when you're supposed to. You never know. You might say, hey, you know what? I think 3 hours is going to be absolutely fine for an international flight. You get to the airport only to find out that the parking garage is full. And now, not only do you have to park somewhere else, but now you got to factor in that extra time to be able to run from that lot to the check-in, just to get to the check-in and find out that there's a 45-minute long wait there. They're overwhelmed, they're understaffed. And now, once you get through that, you still got to make it through the security line, which is over an hour long. And during this whole process, you are incredibly stressed. Now, there's also those little things in life that'll start to eat away at you, right? So if you're already in that situation, if you're by yourself, it's stressful enough. Now start factoring children into the process. Start factoring in a spouse or significant other who might be whiny and doesn't deal with stress as well as you do. Start factoring in the fact that maybe you have to use the bathroom, or maybe you hadn't had a chance to eat breakfast or lunch or something. I mean, there's always those things that'll continue to eat away at you in life while you're already dealing with the bigger stressors. So I would always say, show up early. Just give yourself that buffer. Be that person who sits there in the seating area or in the terminal area, non-stressed, sipping a coffee or a tea, reading something, and just waiting on the flight. Yes, you might have to sit there and wait, an hour and a half, 2 hours after you've made it through security, but at least you're not stressed. That's the biggest point. That's the biggest takeaway, is at least you're not stressed. So, all right, we've covered best times to book, when to arrive at the airport. Now let's talk quick about keeping within your budget. Keeping within your budget, this is going to be a tough one. So let me throw this up on the dry erase board. Keeping within budget, another tough one. Everyone has this ideal range that they want to try and stick to, right? When we're talking about budgets for travel, and it's a lot more difficult during the travel high season to maintain a travel budget. All right. It doesn't mean that you can't. If you're a meticulous planner, you might already know how this game goes and you have everything, fine tuned down to the T. That's not for everyone, but for the average person, let's just say you're planning a trip for, 2 people from New York down to Orlando, Florida during the travel high season, and you've given yourself $2,500 or $2,000 to enjoy this. That's $300 something for the plane tickets each. Then you got the hotel for 4 or 5 days, however long you decide to stay there. And then of course you have park tickets, food, gas, etc. $2,000 might actually cut it, but staying within that budget, it's going to be a lot more difficult. And one of the ways that you can actually get around running over your budget is to do a little bit of research. Okay. Information is always important. It's always ever present. It's one of those things that will set you apart from your competitors. It'll set you apart from your past experiences. So if you've gone to, Florida in the past, you've gone to Orlando, you've had a terrible experience, you've run into a lot of stress and delays, you've run over budget, you've been out of control, just do your homework. All right. There's no reason why you have to experience this stress, and there's no reason why you need to repeat the same experience once again. What I would say is do your research. Okay. If you're looking at plane tickets, then try and find out what the average plane ticket from your destination or your origin to that destination is during that time of year. If it costs on average around $250 to fly from your location to Orlando, Florida during the travel high season, those tickets might be $400 now. Hotel rooms might jump up, 130%. Car rental rates, there's a lot more people, especially in a place like Orlando. You're not just talking about Americans you have to contend with. You're talking about a lot of foreign travelers. So you have to start dealing with them too, which means the rental car fleet is going to be quickly diminished. Those prices are going to be climbing even higher. And then, of course, while you're there, gas prices are going to be more expensive. Everything's going to be more expensive. So I would just say that if you're trying to keep a budget, the more research you can do in advance, the closer you're going to be to keeping that budget. If you just set yourself a dollar target and you're like, okay, well, $3,000 is all I got for this trip, then you have to sit there and do the homework and try and figure out before you buy the tickets to go on this trip if that's even going to work, because you might come to find out that if you and your significant other and children have set $3,000 budget limit for this trip, that it's going to cost you an estimation of $3,000 to $4,000. Obviously, you're either going to go over budget or you're just not going to make it happen. And in some cases, you might just decide, you know what, this trip's not happening this year. We're going to go somewhere different. And that's absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with changing your mind, of course. It doesn't mean that, sorry, sip of coffee there, but it doesn't mean that budget should always drive your decision making. But a lot of times for many people, budget does drive their decision making process when it comes to travel, especially when you're talking about traveling with 2 or 3 children. That just changes the game altogether. I know a lot of people from my military background who have not had the opportunity to go home to visit family during the holidays because, they're once again dealing with a peak season, which means that the rates are up on everything. And they have a family of 4 or 5 and it's just too expensive. Just to fly alone would be, $2,000 to $2,500 for them. And now we're talking about adding other things on top of that, like rental cars and hotels and the many little things and feeding all those mouths. That's a difficult thing to do. So keeping within your budget is going to be a lot more difficult. At the end of the day, my best suggestion for you, do your homework. If you're trying to keep a budget, do your homework in advance. Find out what the average cost of plane tickets is. Find out where at your destination, find out what the average cost of hotel room rates are. This way, you'll be able to actually try and figure out in advance if you're able to keep within that budget. If you're not, that's not a big deal. Then you just adjust, you pivot, you decide to go somewhere different, and maybe you end up visiting Orlando on the low season where it's a lot more affordable. Maybe you hold off on your vacation altogether, or maybe you just take a road trip. You have options, but if you're trying to keep a budget, the best thing that you can do is do your homework. That's the best I could tell you when it comes to that. And of course, we will talk about that in the future, how to specifically keep a travel budget. Now, last thing we're going to talk about is weighing your options on where and when to go. This is another one of those things that's just like a budget. You have to do your homework. All right. If I'm trying to decide where I want to go and, there's a very limited criteria that I'm dealing with, such as, okay, I have 2 children that I'm bringing with me. I need to at least have this accommodation. I need to have a car that's got car seats. I need to have a vehicle that's got plenty of trunk space, like maybe a minivan while you're traveling. There's quite a few variables that go into that. So one of the things that you're going to have to learn to deal with is that in order to have all those answers, you're once again going to have to do your research. So if you're planning on a trip for 4 or 5 to go to Orlando, you have to do some research in advance to figure out if that's the best time to go or if that's even the right place to go, because maybe in the end of the day, it's not the right place to go because they have such a limitation on things. I would hate to go online and book a rental vehicle just to show up at the destination and find out that they're limited on those vehicles or they don't have any more of those vehicles. And now you have to try and fit luggage for 5 people into a sedan that's ill-equipped to handle that much. So I would just say you have to do your homework. Now, one of the things that you could consider as an alternative to your plans is, give yourself a few options. Sometimes, you might have to weigh things and say, all right, here's our option. We can either go here, A, which is, for the family of 4, I'm just going to keep using this example. We could say, hey, look, we're going to go to Orlando. If we can meet this budget, if we can meet the accommodation requirements, etc. Or we're going to take a road trip, and if we can't meet everything on A, at least we can do B. So if I'm deciding on where I'm going to go, some of the things that I need to do, and I know it's annoying, I know it's a pain to sit there and dedicate that time, especially if you're working all day and in the evenings you have no energy. The kids want you to play with them. You got to make dinner. You got to prepare for the next day. You just find yourself so limited on time that sometimes the best thing that you can do is just wing it. Now, winging it, sometimes it does work, but let's be honest, in most cases, if you just decide to wing it, you're going to end up with more stress than you needed to have, because at the end of the day, you might decide that trip was not worth taking, especially at that time, that, maybe once you get going, you realize there's absolutely no way that you're going to be able to stick within your budget. And now you have to deal with that stress because now you're on this vacation thinking, well, we're going to have to buy food from a grocery store. We're going to have to eat fruit throughout the day instead of stopping to get snacks at different places. We got to adjust and calibrate and try and find ways to fine tune this thing so we can get as close to budget as possible. And if we can't get the rental car vehicle that we're looking for, then we got to deal with that stress, or who's going to watch the dog. I mean, there's just so many things that come within this bubble, this situation. It's always going to be sitting there and gnawing away at people when you're trying to deal with these things. So what I would say is, when you're trying to figure out when and where to go, the best thing you can do is your homework. All right. And we're definitely going to dive into this more in future podcasts. But if you're trying to figure out the best places to go and the best times to go, you have to figure out ultimately what's most important to you. Do you want to go to a location that has less travelers? If that's the case, then you probably want to avoid places like Orlando and maybe go get a a cabin on a lake somewhere, have a quieter vacation, have something a little bit more secluded. And then during the low travel seasons, try and aim for those Orlando visits or those Disney visits, whatever you want to do. And if you decide that the most important thing to you is a road trip through a certain area so you can visit a national park, well, then you kind of need to do your homework and figure out what are the wait times for getting into those national parks. Because, a lot of people have this assumption that you can just show up to a national park and just kind of park your car and just walk right in. Everything's going to be great, but that's not usually the way it happens. A lot of times you have to book in advance. So if that's what you're planning on doing, then you're going to need to do some research. And I think that's ultimately the topic here, or that's going to be the bottom line of this topic, is when we're talking about travel high season, the way to counter those things, that higher stress level, the longer wait times, the more time required, the higher costs, etc., is research. It's information, right? The more information I have, the more of an educated decision I can make in the end. And for me, that's going to reduce my stress when I know that I've made the right decision. Showing up on time is going to reduce my stress when I'm talking about my stress levels dealing from being too late, being too close on time to my takeoff times or whatever. But the more information you get in advance, the less you're going to have to deal with on the backside. If you know that travel garages or parking garages have a tendency to fill up in advance, maybe try parking somewhere else. Maybe try showing up early. Maybe try setting yourself up into a position where you have the solution already provided to you before you even start your trip. You have to plan. Planning is it's a necessary thing. Unfortunately, during the travel high season, if what you plan on doing is just winging the entire thing, then you're going to have to expect that your stress levels are going to be through the roof. Your costs are going to be unexpected a lot of times. And the times that you're required to stand in line or wait for something or get through a certain process, if you don't already know, might just shock you in the end. All right. Well, I hope this helps. Thank you again for listening. We'll try to fine tune these things as we go on. I really want to expand on this topic. I really want to talk about the best ways to plan in advance, the best ways to do your homework, the best way to try and find out this information before you go. But right now, the biggest thing that you need to understand is travel high season, it brings stress. It brings longer wait times. It brings higher costs. It brings a lot of things that you're going to need to contend with. And so at the end of the day, the best way to get around those or to prepare for those is to plan meticulously. And that's what we're here to help with. So again, thank you for listening. This is the Planivaudio Travel Podcast. We'll see you again soon. Have a great day.